Evelyn never thought silence could sound this loud. The day Clara slammed the door, her voice still echoed, cold, sharp, final. Stay away from my family. It had been 5 years. Seasons passed, birthdays faded, and every missed call became another scar. Evelyn didn't know how to heal. She'd watch her daughter's life unfold through filtered photos online. Smiling faces, new house, perfect family, and whisper a blessing under her breath, even when her heart begged for a reason. Until one morning, the phone rang. "Mrs. Grant? We need your signature to avoid foreclosure." The name on the paperwork stopped her breath. Clara's. Her daughter's dream home was falling apart. And somehow, fate was calling her back into the story she was forced to leave. The paper trembled in her hands, but it wasn't the ink that made her shiver. It was the thought of her daughter's voice on the other end of that call. Evelyn hadn't heard it in half a decade, yet she could still recall every tone of her laughter, every angered word she didn't deserve. She wanted to hate her. She truly did. But mothers don't unlove. They just learn to live with distance. She sat there in silence, the way people do when their heart remembers something their mind tried to forget. Outside, the morning air carried the smell of wet earth and memories. Evelyn walked to the mailbox, her slippers damp from dew, and paused. Because for a second she swore she saw her daughter's car pull into the old driveway across the field. But it wasn't her. Just another stranger. Her chest tightened anyway. It was strange, she thought, how grief can disguise itself as hope, appearing in familiar headlights, vanishing before you can wave. Back inside, she opened a drawer and pulled out a faded envelope labeled, "For Clara." She had written it years ago, the night she realized her daughter might never call again. The words inside were soft, apologetic, and unfinished. She placed the letter next to the phone. This time, she wouldn't call. Not yet. She needed to understand what kind of storm could make her daughter reach out after all these years. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The sound of rain on the roof became her lullaby and her curse. She imagined her daughter somewhere in that same storm, frightened, desperate, maybe even sorry. When the thunder rolled, she whispered, "If you need me, I'm still here." The words vanished into the dark, but something deep inside her shifted. For the first time in years, hope didn't hurt. Clara's perfect world had cracks. She just refused to see them. The marble floors, the garden parties, the smiling family photos, all illusions paid for by overdue bills and sleepless nights. That morning, she found Daniel pacing in the kitchen, phone in hand, voice low but sharp. "Well, figure it out," he hissed, ending the call when he saw her. The silence that followed was heavier than truth. Then came the envelope on the counter. Notice of default. Clara's hands shook as she read her own name beside words she couldn't believe. Final warning. Her throat tightened. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel. Fear. She chased him into the living room, voice trembling. "Daniel, what is this?" He poured himself coffee instead of answering. "It's just a mix-up," he said, but his eyes betrayed panic. The air between them thickened, the kind that smells of lies and coffee gone cold. "You said the business was fine," Clara pressed. "It was," he muttered, then turned sharply. "You think your mother can fix everything, don't you? Maybe you should call her." His words hit harder than the notice. He knew exactly how to wound her, with the one name she couldn't bear to say. By noon, Clara sat in her car, parked a few blocks away, staring at her phone. Her finger hovered over a contact she swore she deleted. Mom. She hadn't called that number in 5 years. Every instinct screamed not to, but desperation speaks louder than pride. She hit dial. It rang once, twice. Then she hung up before it connected. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked nothing like the woman who once said She'd never need anyone again. When she finally returned home, the sound of her son's laughter greeted her. Small, innocent, unaware. She hugged him tighter than usual, eyes closed, as if holding him could keep the world from collapsing. From the hallway, Daniel watched, arms folded, face unreadable. "We'll lose the house, Clara," he said flatly. "Unless your mother signs the deed transfer." "She's still co-owner?" Clara froze. The past she buried had suddenly become her only lifeline. That night, Clara sat alone at the dining table, the house silent, except for the ticking clock. Her wedding photo stared back at her, smiling faces that now felt like strangers. Her eyes drifted to the corner, where a box of unpaid bills lay hidden under receipts and guilt. "Stay away from my family." The words she'd once screamed at her mother replayed like a curse. Now she was the one standing on the edge of loss. Pride had built this house, but maybe only humility could save it. The road to her mother's cottage hadn't changed. Narrow, lined with maple trees and memories Clara once promised to forget. She parked a few feet away and sat there, hands trembling on the steering wheel, heart pounding like a guilty drum. The thought of seeing Evelyn again made her throat tighten. Pride told her to leave. Desperation told her to knock. Finally, she stepped out into the morning air, heavy with the scent of wet soil and forgiveness waiting to be earned. The knock echoed like a memory through Evelyn's quiet home. When she opened the door, time seemed to stop. Mother and daughter, standing inches apart but years apart all the same. Neither spoke at first. Clara's lips parted, but words failed her. Evelyn's eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. "I wondered when you'd remember the way back," she said. Clara's tears came without warning. "We need your help," she whispered. The confession shattered whatever walls still stood between them. Inside, the air smelled of tea and nostalgia. Clara placed the papers on the table, explaining everything in broken sentences. The debts, the bank, the house. Evelyn listened, her face unreadable. "You want my signature?" she finally asked. Clara nodded, ashamed. Evelyn took a slow sip of tea before replying. "Then you'll tell me the truth," she said gently. "What happened that day? Why did you tell me to stay away?" Clara froze. The truth had lived in her throat for years, and now it burned its way out. Clara's voice cracked as she began. "Daniel told me. You tried to take money from my inheritance. He said you were jealous. He showed me proof." Evelyn's lips parted, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Old, worn, sealed. "This is what I sent you that week," she said softly. Inside, Clara found a letter in her mother's handwriting. It wasn't about money. It was a note of love, apology, and blessing for her marriage. No demands, no bitterness. Just love. Clara's hands trembled as the lie unraveled before her eyes. For a long moment, there was silence, the kind that feels sacred. Clara wiped her tears, voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong." Evelyn reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly, resting over her daughter's. "I know," she said. "But sometimes, love waits for truth before it comes home." Outside, the wind carried away the last remnants of pride. Inside, forgiveness found its way between two hearts stitched by time and pain. Later that evening, Evelyn sat by the fireplace, while Clara read the letter again and again, her eyes red from tears and disbelief. "He told me you wanted control of my inheritance," Clara whispered. Evelyn looked at her, calm but wounded. "And you believed him because it was easier than believing I loved you." The words struck deep. For the first time, Clara saw how her silence had hurt more than any argument could have. Evelyn spoke again, voice low. There are things you don't know about your husband, Clara. I stayed silent because I thought it would protect you. But silence has a price. Evelyn rose and walked to an old cabinet, retrieving a folder covered in dust. Inside were printed emails, account statements, and a photo. Daniel with another woman, dated months before their wedding. He came to me first, Evelyn said quietly. He wanted to transfer the family trust into his company name. When I refused, he convinced you I was against him. Against you. Clara's breath caught. The world around her blurred. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, tears streaking her cheeks. Because you wouldn't have listened, Evelyn whispered. You were in love. The weight of truth pressed down on Clara's chest until she could barely breathe. Every memory of Daniel, every loving word, every promise began to sound like a rehearsed line. She stood, trembling. He lied to both of us, she said, her voice shaking with fury and shame. Evelyn nodded slowly. And lies don't just steal trust, Clara. They steal years. Clara looked at her mother through tears that finally felt cleansing. Then it's time he gives them back. That night, Clara drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past her windshield like streaks of regret. Every mile brought her closer to confrontation. Not just with Daniel, but with herself. She remembered her mother's final words before she left. The truth only hurts until you face it. Then it frees you. She repeated them like a prayer. When she pulled into her driveway, Daniel was waiting on the porch, phone in hand, expression unreadable. The storm had finally arrived. Where were you? Daniel asked coolly as Clara approached. She didn't answer. She threw the folder at his feet. The photos, the proof, the lies. His face drained of color. You went to her. You shouldn't have. Clara's voice was steady now, the kind that comes from pain turned to clarity. You made me hate the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. That's on you. Thunder rolled above them, echoing her words. In that moment, she wasn't just confronting a husband. She was burying a lie that had lived too long. Daniel's lies unraveled like threads pulled from an old sweater. The more Clara tugged, the more truth fell apart around her. The woman in the photo was his business partner and his mistress. The company losses were transfers to secret accounts. Her trust fund, gone. You said you were saving us, Clara said, voice quivering between rage and heartbreak. Daniel didn't deny it. He just sighed, like guilt was an inconvenience. You wanted a perfect life. I gave you one, he said. You just never asked what it cost. Clara realized then she hadn't lost a husband. She lost herself trying to keep him. She packed a single suitcase before dawn, not out of fear, but finality. Her son stirred awake, rubbing his sleepy eyes as she knelt beside him. We're going to Grandma's, she whispered, forcing a smile through trembling lips. He smiled back, unaware of the history she was about to rewrite. As the sun rose, Clara looked one last time at the house she once called home. It was beautiful, yes, but empty. Love couldn't live there anymore. The drive back to her mother's cottage felt different this time. The same trees, the same bends, but a lighter heart at every turn. She rehearsed her apology over and over, but when she arrived, Evelyn was already waiting at the door, as if she had known. Without a word, Clara fell into her arms. There were no questions, no blame, just two broken hearts learning how to beat together again. The world outside was silent, but inside, healing had begun. Later that day, they sat at the same wooden table where truth was once confessed. The foreclosure papers still lay there, waiting. Evelyn looked at her daughter's tired eyes and smiled faintly. You came for a signature, she said softly. But what you needed was a beginning. Clara nodded, tears falling freely. I don't want the house anymore, she whispered. I just want to come home. For the first time, Evelyn reached across the table without hesitation, and this time, her hand didn't tremble. That night, the three of them, Evelyn, Clara, and the boy, shared dinner in quiet laughter. It wasn't a grand meal, but it felt whole. Evelyn watched her grandson eat, realizing she'd been gifted a second chance to love the parts of Clara she thought she'd lost. Clara smiled, the kind of smile that comes after surviving a storm. The house they once fought over suddenly didn't matter. What mattered was who sat around that table, together again. Days passed, and peace began to settle into the small cottage like sunlight through lace curtains. Clara helped in the garden, her son's laughter echoing between the trees. Evelyn watched quietly, a mix of pride and ache in her eyes, the kind only mothers know. She could see how fragile Clara still was, how guilt weighed on her like invisible chains. But she also saw something else blooming: humility, gratitude, strength. "You're starting to breathe again," Evelyn said one morning. Clara smiled faintly. "Because I'm finally home." One afternoon, Clara found the foreclosure papers still tucked beneath a book on the table. She picked them up, staring at the signature line her mother had never signed. "We could still save it," she murmured. Evelyn looked up from her knitting, expression calm but resolute. "And what would that save, Clara? A building, or the pain tied to it?" Clara's eyes softened. The house had once been her dream. Now it felt like a monument to everything she'd lost. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's just walls." Evelyn nodded. "Then let's tear down what keeps us apart." Evelyn took the papers in her hand and, with a slow breath, tore them clean down the middle. The sound was soft, almost sacred. Clara gasped, then smiled through tears. "You just," Evelyn interrupted gently. "That house was never your home. You don't need my signature to keep what truly matters." Clara covered her mouth, emotion trembling through her. In that moment, forgiveness wasn't spoken. It was done. That evening, they sat outside as the sun began to set behind the hills. "I thought losing everything meant failure," Clara said softly. "But maybe it means a new start." Evelyn smiled. "The world breaks us to show what we're made of. You've always had more strength than you knew." Clara leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, of love that had endured the worst and come back stronger. As dusk turned to night, Evelyn lit an old lantern and placed it by the window, something she used to do years ago whenever she waited for Clara to come home. "For old times?" Clara asked, smiling through tears. "No," Evelyn said softly. "For new ones." The glow filled the cottage, touching every corner that once held grief. For the first time in years, their home wasn't haunted by silence. It was alive with forgiveness, laughter, and light. Months later, spring had returned. The cottage looked different now. Windows open, curtains fluttering, laughter echoing from the kitchen. Clara had found work at the local school. Her son thrived among wildflowers and books. And Evelyn, she smiled more these days. The wounds hadn't vanished, but they'd turned into stories. Ones they could finally share without tears. Over morning tea, Evelyn said, "Funny how we spend years building walls, when all we needed was a table between us." Clara laughed softly. "Then let's keep it full." That afternoon, a letter arrived. A bank notice confirming the old house had been sold. Clara stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. She no longer felt loss, only closure. She handed it to her mother and said, "It's done." Evelyn folded the paper neatly and set it aside. "Then it's time for us to build something new," she replied. It wasn't about walls or roofs anymore. It was about building peace, brick by brick, with the kind of love that never asks for repayment. Weeks later, they stood together on a small plot of land overlooking a quiet meadow. "It's not much," Clara said shyly, holding blueprints. Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder. It's everything. The new house would be simple. A place where laughter could echo without fear, where silence meant peace, not punishment. For the first time, they built something side by side, not out of pride or inheritance, but out of trust. The day they moved in, paint brushes in hand, they laughed as streaks of color ended up everywhere except the walls. You missed a spot, Evelyn teased. You missed a decade? Clara joked back. Their laughter filled the air like a song long forgotten. For every brushstroke, there was forgiveness. For every corner painted, a memory healed. The house wasn't grand, but it was theirs. A living testament to second chances. That evening, the three stood before their freshly painted door, pale yellow, the color of morning. Clara looked at her mother, eyes glistening. You know, she said, you never needed to sign those papers. Evelyn smiled, voice gentle. I did sign something, Clara. I signed my silence away. They both laughed softly. The camera would linger here. Two women who'd lost everything except each other, holding hands as the lantern by the doorway flickered to life. Some stories end with closure. Theirs ended with home.